time to start getting a little bit more serious and looking at some of those hard, complex questions about FMK, about my involvement with it, about Freddie Lee, about the other Todai and people involved directly in FMK, about Travis Johnson, about the other people who were resistant to FMK, about the 27,000 subscribers to the channel before it got shut down. And not only in this respect, but certainly in this respect, I think it's very unfortunate that Google chose to shut down the FMK channel, because personally I would have loved to have that record there to refer to, you know, at this point, as I'm reflecting back on it. And probably in the last like 6 months of my direct involvement with FMK, I was really starting to consider the potential analysis of some of the phenomena that I was seeing on the channel. And it would have been nice to have the direct quotes, both from Freddie and from everybody who responded to the channel, you know, to really explore what went on there. So now we only have memory to go by, and so I kind of feel pressed for time, because memory fades, and I kind of feel like I want to capture as much as I remember of what went on, because of the potential lessons that are going to be lost if we don't capture some of that. And you know, I've heard other people talk about how, you know, the loss of the FMK channel is disturbing because we won't get to see into the mind of somebody that's psychologically troubled and that kind of thing. You know, I don't know. I think we're all a little bit psychologically troubled, and I think it's reflected in the fact that there were 27,000 subscribers to the FMK channel. And I think, you know, that's just one of the really interesting topics that needs to be looked at, and maybe the first one. Maybe that's where we should start. And maybe I'll talk about it as the packaging of FMK, in a sense, because that's really what I think was going on there with 27,000 people. Now, I mean, 27,000 is different than 1 million, but you got to consider we're taking a guy who was heretofore unknown. You know, he's not a celebrity. Not a celebrity at all. This was a guy who, you know, just grew up in Chicago, normal dude. Went into law enforcement. Got pushed out of law enforcement for whatever reasons. You know, I can't really weigh in on that. Although I think it's probably good that Freddie Lee is not in law enforcement in Chicago. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say something like that, because everybody's got their problems, and if I really was, you know, had the opportunity to explore any particular law enforcement officer's life, I would probably find 90% of them to be, I would probably judge 90% of them to be to have in that kind of a position. And I have a bias against cops. I should just admit that right up front. I don't like cops. I had a good friend, really good friend in high school who ended up becoming a cop, and although he's a good guy and he's in it for the good purposes and all that kind of stuff, like, it really skewed my views on police. The day that he told me, not to take it the wrong way if he used his command voice on me, and I was like, well, fuck you if you use your command voice on me. At that point, you will lose a friend. Anyway, the point is, Freddie was not a celebrity, and he was able to gain a fairly large viewership on YouTube in a really short amount of time. I mean, I myself have been on YouTube for, I think, about closing in on 2.5 years now that I've been regularly, almost daily, posting videos up there, and I am shy of 200 subscribers. Freddie got 27,000 in not much more than double the time. So my question is, to begin with, how does that happen? Or how does that come about? Those kind of numbers, because he really never put out a video that was so extraordinary that it went viral. There was no viral FMK videos. There were some videos that became very popular, and oftentimes they were pretty mundane. Like I think, for instance, one of the videos on the FMK channel that always got a lot of, well, almost every day got some kind of views or comments and such, was a very novice instructional how to take care of turtles by Jenny Lee, who had no experience taking care of turtles and who was in some respects very far off base and leading people into a situation where their turtles would be living rather short lives. And because it was a basic, like, how-to, and maybe there wasn't a whole lot of how to take care of turtles on YouTube, that video got a lot of feedback. Some of the other ones that got a lot of feedback, were a lot of hits and brought the channel into some popularity, were the flexibility videos. Freddie is able to do the splits, which for a grown man is a fairly rare thing. And so he would do tutorials how to do the splits, and they would basically comprise a performance of him doing the splits or going through his daily stretching regime, which, if someone followed on a daily basis, maybe in time they would be able to do the splits. I don't know. I'm not able to do the splits myself. So I can't really speak to what it takes to do the splits. But there are a lot of people who, part of their, interest in the martial arts or otherwise in health, see the middle splits as something that's important to be able to do. And I agree with martial arts, it is fairly important to be able to do. For various reasons. Freddie's able to do it, and he's able to do it very well. He looks good doing it, and so those videos got a lot of hits and a lot of positive feedback. Helped bring the channel into popularity. The other thing that helped bring the channel into popularity were the in terms of specific videos, were some of the most explicit rants against MMA and against particular martial artists or styles or these kind of things. The rants that were recognizably so ridiculous that there was a lot of interest in it, just in the sense of resistance of people that they were like, who is this guy? And I can't believe that this person believes that they are a seafood with this kind of negative perspective, negative and off-base perspective on martial arts. So these are some of the videos that I think really contributed to viewership of FMK, but really I think there's much more to it than this. There's very, very much more to it than the individual videos, and that's where I want to put out there the possibility, for people to consider that the packaging has a lot more to do with it. And what I mean by the packaging is the imagery. And, in this respect, I think it's worth conceding, just for the, it's a little embarrassing, but I think it needs to be said and it needs to be considered, because it is kind of a social phenomenon we're dealing with when you have 27,000 strangers tuning into your stuff. I can only look at it really, well, not only, but one of the ways that I see it most, or that from my perspective, one of the ways I can honestly speak about it is from my perspective. And I have to confess that I think part of the reason I was drawn to FMK was because of the packaging, was because of the appearance of Freddie Lee and of the FMK clone, but especially of Freddie Lee. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and so I was exposed to all of the classic martial arts, American martial arts cinema. So you get you got Bruce Lee, which includes some of the Chinese, and of course we had Kung Fu theater and that kind of thing, which was Chinese. So we had Bruce Lee, Kung Fu theater, Chuck Norris, Jean-Claude Van Damme, eventually Steven Seagal. We had this whole like very popular genre, all the ninja movies, Karate Kid. You know, the martial arts in the 80s was big stuff. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was very, very popular. And, you know, I grew up like playing with G.I. Joes and that kind of thing. You know, to tell you the truth, Freddie Lee looks a little bit like Quick Kick from my G.I. Joe action figures. And I certainly couldn't say honestly that part of my attraction to Freddie Lee and FMK was not informed by these archetypes, these media-induced archetypes of what a martial artist is, the archetypes that I was exposed to as a child of the 80s. Because you look at Freddie Lee, and here you have a guy who looks, whose appearance, and he knows this, he plays off this, whose appearance is every bit that archetype. You know, he is Chinese, he keeps, you know, clean cut, he's built muscularly somewhat, but not like a bodybuilder, but more like a martial artist. He goes around most of the time with his shirt off, just like your action figures, like Quick Kick had no shirt. Bruce Lee, in his movies, often his clothes came off so you could see his build. And he's able to do, you know, phenomenal things with his body, like the splits, like, you know, the planche and these kind of things. There was something to that, I believe, I'm putting out there, I'm positing, there is something to that packaging that makes Freddie Lee very attractive. And a lot of people, more than 27,000 really, because we lost lots of subscribers along the way, and there are people that checked it out regardless of whether they subscribe or not. But for whatever reason, whether somebody did a search on YouTube for something in martial arts and came across Freddie's material as the results of that search, or whether they saw Freddie in the sidebar somewhere, for whatever reason, I believe that the packaging attracts people to open it. Attracts people to open it and say, oh yeah, this does look like a real martial artist. This does look like the real thing. This does look like the archetype. I mean, this is all subconscious, but this does look like the archetype. Exactly like the archetype that I had when I used to play with my G.I. Joe toys. And this was what I imagined a martial artist would be. And I believe Freddie has that same archetype. I believe he's living that because he's just as American as any of us, and grew up with that same media. I'm going to cut there, and I'm going to do a part 2.